Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast, episode number 215 of the show. I'm Ramon Mejia, here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This week I have 7 new LitRPG titles just for you folks at home, and that's going to include some wonderful titles, if I can ever pull them up. Here we go. That include Temper, an Apocalyptic LitRPG series, Red Mage book number 2, Legacy of the Bloodreaver, Crematoria online book number 2, Guard, Web of Worlds, Empire, which is the first book in that series. And then we have 4 reviews from Ian, our correspondent, including Tree Dungeon, a dungeon core epic, The Divine Sea, book number 1. Also Tusk and Blade, also Spells for Sale, Magik Volume 1. And finally, The Destroying Play, Disgardium, book number 3 from Ian. But before we get into that, we're going to, of course, go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we have a couple stories, a couple great sales for you folks at home, actually, including Cosmo Yap's Opening Moves, the first book in the game series. Book 1 is free right now. Definitely, that should is actually one of the few ones that has consistently gotten 9 out of 10 review scores for me. So definitely go check it out if you haven't had a chance to. Book 1 is again free. They're definitely trying to entice you in getting the entire series, which I don't doubt that you do once you read book number 1. But also don't forget that you can also pick up the audiobook at a discounted price if you have the corresponding ebook already in your library. So that's also more incentive. Also, Life Reset, the author of that, has put the first book available for this weekend only, for 99 cents. So great story as well. Really fun series. Enjoyed every book. Go grab it at 99 cents. So there you go. That's all the stuff we have for LitRPG news. We're of course going to go into stuff that is out now. This is stuff that has come out recently. I've been a chance to read it, but it's available for you to enjoy. And that includes Morgan Cole's Inheritance, a LitRPG space adventure, The Last Enclave book. This is apparently being published by Shadow Alley Press, so they always do good work. Also out is Jonathan Brooks' latest dungeon core story called The Dungeon Fairy. As is non-player character, Waking Up in Arcania. That's a new title. I haven't heard anything about it. It just says it's LitRPG, so we'll give it a shot. Also out now is Tales of Dungeons Volume number 2, edited by Jeffrey Falcon-Logue, who is the authors of the Slime Dungeon Chronicles. He's always done really good, interesting work. And again, this is the second volume of his kind of anthology collection of different dungeon core stories from different authors in the genre. There are going to be some familiar names if you've read volume number 1, but also some new names here and there, so definitely go check it out. It is out now. In new LitRPG audiobooks, we have quite a few in this section as well this week, including The Crafting of Chess, which is a story that got an 8 out of 10 for me. It's a good, great story. Enjoyed it a lot. I just wish there was a second book. From Jonathan Brooks as well, we have the 5th book in the Dungeon Core series, Station Cores, called The Other Cores. So book number 5 in that series is out as an audiobook for you. Also out now is the 2nd book in the Bad Guy series, called Second Story Man, written by Eric Ugland. So that is out for you, as is Bibliomancer, Wolfman Warlock. This is a story that's set in the Completionist Chronicles universe, but it's written by James Hunter and Dakota Kraut, and you can kind of see their influences, the puns from Dakota, a lot of the encapsulated storytelling that's a little less slice of life from James Hunter. Entertaining story, does not change anything from the Completionist Chronicle series as much as it kind of tells the story of a character that may be coming up in the Completionist Chronicle series. So it's definitely a side story. It doesn't take away, but also doesn't add a ton of stuff, and you kind of know where it goes if you've read that series a little bit before, but still entertaining. Also out is the 4th Realm in the Town Realm series, so it's book number 4 in that series by Michael Chatfield. Always an entertaining series. Everything in that series is always wonderful, so go check it out. Also from Blaze Corbin and Alton Foster, this is more of a gamelit audiobook, but still very enjoyable, from two authors that I've always enjoyed, Cold-Blooded. So that's one that's out now, just popped up. So I'm just adding it to the podcast this week. And there you go. That's all the stuff that came out this week, from audiobooks and ebooks on to upcoming LitRPG, where I just read off a bunch of stuff. You can skip ahead if you want to, but it's a list of things that are coming out in the near future, so you can plan your reading schedule or your publishing schedule as the condition may be, including Gods of Ash and Amber, the fourth book in the Seeds of Chaos series, which is going to be out on the 29th of February. Also on the 29th, it's going to be Glory of the Formation Empire, book number 3. On March the 2nd, it's going to be The Last Time Luke, volume number 2, called Max of the Rebellion. Also, Inora Online, book number 7, will be out on March the 2nd. J.D. Asher's latest book on March the 3rd, called Neon Dark. The 5th book in the Project Chrysalis series will be out on March the 5th. Let's see, March the 5th, called Journey Never Ends. A new series called The Incarnator, Project Stellar, book number 1, will be out on March the 9th. Reading It Online, The Alchemic Weaponer, book number 5, will be out on March the 10th. Traveling Dungeon will be out on March the 14th as the second book in that series, called The Dungeon Travels. The second book in the Beetle series, called The Hive, will be out on March the 17th. The story called Dark World Paris, a Cthulhu LitRPG, will be out on March the 19th. The third book in the Underdog series will be out on March the 20th. The first book in a new series called Rogue Merchant. This is a translated work called The Starlight Sword, will be out on March 23rd. Another translated story will be out on March 25th called Stranger is Coming, LitRPG class neutral series. March the 30th, it'll be the fifth book in the Hero Online series. On April the 1st, it'll be Sentenced to Troll, book number 3. Always a fun series, funny too. The third book in the World of Change series will be out on April the 2nd. Eastbound in Town, the 8th book in the Good Guys series, will be out on April the 2nd as well. The second book in the Sun and Shadow Online series will be out on April the 10th of this year. The 5th book in the Dragon Heart series will be out on April the 15th. The 4th book in the Disgardium series will be out on April the 29th. Remember that our correspondent Ian Mitchell is actually reviewing the 3rd book in the series, so this is book number 4. Also, the 3rd book in the Player Who Reached the Top series, which is one that Ian Mitchell, our correspondent, has actually enjoyed quite a bit apparently, is out on April the 29th. On April the 30th, it'll be Legends Online Gauntlet, book number 5. On May the 1st, it'll be Warsinger, The Dragon Riders Adventures Orkami Online Chronicles, book number 4 by James Osiris Baldwin. It's a fun series. On May the 5th, Blood Crown, book number 2. On May 31st, Path of Alchemy, Glory Formation Emperor, book number 4. And last but not least, it'll be, thankfully, the 6th book in the Reality Bender series by Michael Antonoff, Aces High. So that's actually a really fun sci-fi adventure series, LitRPG, in there, a little on the lighter side, but still fun, out on June the 9th. And that's all I have for you folks for upcoming LitRPG. Hey everybody, first up this week is going to be Temper, an apocalyptic LitRPG series, Red Mage, book number 2, published by Mountain Dog Press. This is the second book in the series. I definitely enjoyed book number 1 immensely, so I was genuinely looking forward to reading this. It is 345 pages, it is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. A haven for humanity. Factions forming and fracturing. The seeds of a new empire. Drew and his team are racing to create a system-recognized habitat. To make this happen, they must conquer more nodes, deal with an antagonistic superior officer, and possibly, worst of all, their own fear. Freeing the trolls' sacrificial captives was only the beginning. Now the remnants of humanity must find a safe place to call home. But Nat's Park isn't the safe haven he was promised it would be. Not only do the internal politics threaten to rip the survivors apart, an unknown danger haunts the stadium. Drew and his allies will struggle to survive in the change world after the advent, as fate works to temper them. So there we go. I got some part of the title in there somewhere. Full disclosure, I received a advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. I got this like a day early. And I bought it. So we should be cool. The basic review is it's a good sequel if you like book number 1. All the action, which was a big focus of book number 1, is here in book number 2. There is less of an emphasis on the survival aspects of the Apocalypse story, which is one of the things I really loved about book number 1. But again, even in book number 1, that kind of went away by about the middle of book number 1 as the story kind of expanded from like the small survivors at the very beginning of the RPG Apocalypse into gathering and kind of trying to create a community of survivors. And it got larger in scope. And so in book number two starts off right after book number 1. And so you're still continuing on with that larger scope of these, hundreds of people kind of community, with a core group of adventurers that the main character gathered in book number 1 is still going out and dungeon diving, trying to capture nodes, getting resources to help people survive. But it's again, there's less of a survivalist tension there in that you're never really worried that people are going to starve. You're never really worried that there's going to be some unsafe environment that at any moment anybody can die. There are some character deaths here, but it's not as heavy as it was in book number 1. At the beginning of book number 1, I remember like just being super surprised that so many people were killed off so quickly. And in book number 2, that's definitely not as big of a thing. So I'm not going to spoil who dies, but it's not nearly as much. And it's not quite as impactful for me as it was in book number 1. There's like a less tension in book number 2. But it's a very good action focused story. And again, the story emphasis kind of shifts again from that small group survival aspect to larger concepts of creating a safe zone by capturing nodes and also by killing monsters, figuring out why this RPG apocalypse is happening in the first place. And there's just kind of a smaller intrigue storyline which is mentioned in the novel description as well. So I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything for you. But again, good RPG progression. I did like the fact that more of the other players' powers were expanded and made more useful. It makes the main character feel a little bit less OP, but still coordinating his powers that everyone else is, making them a very effective fighting group against the expanding threats to their groups from the RPG apocalypse and those monsters and all that stuff. So good fun stuff. Overall, a good book. Again, just slightly less tension than in book 1, but still very entertaining. Gets a score of 7.5 out of 10 from me. That's Temper, an LitRPG Apocalyptic LitRPG series, Red Mage book number 2, with a score of again 7.5 out of 10. Okay, next up for this episode of the podcast is Legacy of the Bloodreaver, Crematoria Online, book number 2, written by Matthew Barbeller. It is 455 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. Crematoria Online, a dark fantasy LitRPGs from Matthew Barbella for the fans of Diablo, Bloodborne, Devil May Cry, and the Elder Scrolls. Making friends has never been Lucas Hutchings' strong suit, but now he has no choice in the matter. He has a promise to keep, but he's not strong enough to do it alone. Lucas forges friendships and alliances with a bunch of ragtag player characters, a purple-haired apothecary with a passion for baking, a mysterious occultist who takes role-playing way too seriously, and a hellkin who just wants everyone to get along. Meanwhile, the armies of the Crimson Queen are gathering in the realm of Sanguinaria. They mean to invade the Four Kingdoms and bend every man, woman, and child to the Crimson Queen's will. Lucas must use his wits and his investigator abilities to find out what the Crimson Queen is up to before it's too late to fight back. So there you go. I actually really enjoyed the beginning portion of this just because it had been a little while since I read book 1. So I couldn't really recall what happened. I remember some detective powers, that was a big emphasis, but this strike, I think, does a really good job of giving a good recap that explains the main characters, the powers, what happened in book 1. It really kind of helped me get right back into the story and recall where everybody was and all the main story plot lines. You could actually probably jump into book 2 without having read book 1. The recap is really that good. Now, the story itself starts in the real world, and it does a really good job of establishing the real life stakes and does some really decent fleshing out of why people would be willing to be stuck in an MMO. This was something I think was lacking in book 1 in making the real world reasoning why people were going to be stuck in a game in book 1. So that was something that less kind of up in there as a question in book 2. Right from the get-go, kind of definitely answers that question. Actually liked book 2 more than book number 1. I don't generally continue on in a series if I gave it a 6 out of 10, which is what I gave book number 1. But I felt that this one had enough potential that I was hoping it would improve, and it did. It really did. This book feels more settled. In book number 1, I wasn't always really sure what kind of story it was trying to be. And I think neither was the author. Like, he was trying to combine a bunch of story concepts that are common in LitRPG, and while trying to also bring in something new. And I wasn't really always sure what kind of story to expect. Was it going to be a magical academy story? Was it going to be a detective story trapped in a game? What the game mechanics were going to be? What was the romance in the story going to develop as? And so that was always an unsure thing. And in book number 2, all those questions are answered. If you've read book number 1, obviously. And even if you haven't, the story just feels more settled because you have your main characters develop. You've already gone through what their powers are going to be, so the author doesn't have to re-explain everything, or why people are trapped in the game or any of that stuff. And so the author has a much clearer opportunity to just world build and character develop, and that really comes through in book number 2 and kind of definitely enhances my enjoyment of the story enough to get it a better score. Overall, again, this is a good story. I liked it. It has some unusual classes, which I think people are going to be fans of. But again, just good action adventure, and also just a better fleshed out world. And the use of the detective skills kind of made more sense. In book 1, this is one of the complaints I had about book 1, was that the powers seem to be making things super easy for the main character as far as like advancing the detective's plotline, because it would essentially magically highlight something and he would just magically get information. And while that technically exists here, it's used less as a story crutch in that the main character still has to discover what these things mean. It's just not magically revealed to him. And so I liked that improvement in the storytelling as well. So for me, the story gets a score of 7.5 out of 10. That's Legacy of the Bloodreaver, Crematoria Online book number 2 with a score of 7.5 out of 10. Okay, next up is Guard, Web of Worlds, Empire, a LitRPG series, book number 1, written by Ivan Shaman. I believe this is a translation work. It is, let me scroll down, 547 pages. It is 99 cents. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. That price might be like an opening special. But here is the author's description. The god of light fell. The demon lord rules the world. Sentient beings were forbidden to develop technology, and people were never able to shift from the steam era to the age of electricity and the internal combustion engine. But as long as you are the light host, you can hope for the best. Even if your house is burned to the ground, even if you lose your family, and even if your overlord sends you to your death, the Blackguard never gives up and continues on his way. Every word here is true, and every word here is a lie. Where is the truth? You can't guess. Choose what you want. And that last part is probably a bigger emphasis. There's actually a little snippet in the novel description that I think is really important. He essentially says that the story developed contrary to the author's plan, and because of the dice rolls, and because of the story choices in the novel were made by dice rolls, and they were made by essentially early reader polls, where readers get to decide what happened in the story. And I think that's the thing that makes this kind of interesting and fun. So I will go into the review. Honestly, when I first read this, when I first looked at the cover art and the novel description, I wasn't particularly interested in the novel. The cover art is not very good. It doesn't tell me anything about the story. It just kind of feels like very bland fantasy cover art. And so I wasn't super enthusiastic going into it. And even the first 5% of the novel felt like it was just Portal Fantasy, not really LitRPG. But then there's an interlude at that point where the author explains that all the major story decisions, whether the action succeeds or fails, are determined by actual dice rolls and reader polls when the story was originally written. It gives the novel a real choose your own story vibe. And I think that's the thing that separates this from other stories, in that it feels put together. It feels very much like a choose your own adventure kind of story. In that, as it goes on, as the story develops, you're seeing text that describes actual dice rolls and story development moments where, the main character actually fails critically. I think it's called something else, like a spectacular failure or something, or a spectacular succession. And that actually changes the course of the story. And you can tell like the author was like trying to put it in a particular direction. Or either like the main character was going to get this magical weapon and start his adventure, but then he critically fails, and now he has -2 to dexterity and strength checks because he just critically failed this roll, and he can't use this weapon. And on that, he also has a fear, a phobia of long swords or something, right? And so he has to like go on his adventure without a weapon. And so there's just a lot of those little moments. And again, it's a regular part of the story. And I think I like that about it. The actual writing and storytelling itself, it's a little mixed. It's not the most amazing. But again, part of that is the fact that it's not a necessarily coherently plotted out story, because again, the choices in the story, where it goes, is made by random dice rolls, and like reader polls, where readers decided, oh, I want this main character to hook up with this chick, or I don't want him to hook up with this chick, and have a good time. And there were different consequences for that. And sometimes you could really in the ready seeing, oh, the author is trying to pull this novel back in some kind of plotted direction, and it's just failing spectacularly, and it's highly entertaining in that respect. So for me, actually, I enjoyed it. It's not the best LitRPG story, just because the character classes, again, this is a consequence of it being a slice of like kind of choose your own adventure story. A lot of the character class development isn't super original. The main character has a unique class called a Blackguard, which is something between like a Justicar and a Paladin and kind of a mage user, so it's a little bit on that side. But there's a lot of interesting moments. On the RPG side of things, this is definitely an RPG. It has this trapped in the game aspect that's more of a minor storyline. But on a practical side, it feels a lot like an RPG fantasy world, where the system messages are part of the culture, as the main character chooses a class, crafting levels, and combat notifications, all that exists in the world as a part of like the culture. And there are some less common classes, and I actually liked one particular unique aspect. It was the trial dialogue system in how the main character used his class abilities to kind of determine whether somebody was guilty or innocent, and either maximize or negate some of the penalties that the system was applying to them for breaking the rules and the law. So I expect that. On the story side of things, again, this is essentially a serial story or slice of life story. So if you're okay with that kind of storytelling, you're probably going to be okay with the story. But again, that's kind of a consequence of the way that it was chosen to be written and how it is developed in kind of a randomish fashion. So for me, I had a good time with it, but not everybody likes those kind of stories. So if you're okay with that choose your own story kind of format, you're probably going to like this, as long as you're okay with that format. The author also notes in his novel that there's a tabletop system based on the story world. He has linked in the back of the book. If you want to go test that out, play test it, he's okay with that. It's just kind of a fun extra thing. So for me, I liked it. Gets a score of 7.2 out of 10. Not the best story I've read this week, but it definitely tried to do something different, and I can always appreciate that. So that's Guard, Web of World, Empire, with a score of 7.2 out of 10. And next we have Ian's Picks of the Week. This is our segment where our correspondent, Ian Mitchell, contributes to the reviews he's done this past week. He reads and reviews, honestly, a little bit more than me these days, but I'm okay with that because he reads different things, and we get a chance to explore some other titles that I may not have had time to or an interest in reading this, but they're all either game lit or LitRPG generally. So this week we have 4 reviews from him, including, first off the bat is going to be Tree Dungeon, a Dungeon Core epic, Divine Seed Book number 1, written by Andrew Karvik. And here is Ian's review of this particular title. He says, Tree Stories. Not the usual Dungeon Core story, no stats, no levels. It has all the activities as other Dungeon Core tales without the game aspect. So I'm like, does that actually make it a LitRPG story? Probably not, but it is a Dungeon Core story. He says, I like the story of the tree that made a dungeon in itself. I treated it with the gods of the world as a divine, but not a god. First person and good reading, it was unique in the world with no sidekick for it to interact with, 7.3 out of 10. And to me, that particular score, 7.3, kind of says that he almost didn't care for it. And this is this is not in the review, so this is really just me being speculative. Because Ian doesn't generally give us anything that he doesn't enjoy. He just doesn't finish it, so there's no point. The fact that we've got a 7.3 means he liked it, but he almost didn't, and I kind of note a couple points in there that might be clues why. One, it's first person, which may or may not be a thing for you, but also that there's no sidekick, which means that there's probably a lot of internal monologue, which can be a little tedious for some people. But he still enjoyed it. It is the Dungeon Core story. It does the Dungeon Core thing. There's just no game mechanics, no levels, no stats. So just be aware of that. This one is a little off the beaten track. But I read what I in reviews off to you, so he's not reading them. But so he liked it. So there you go. Next on his review list this week is Tusk and Blade, Exodus Online, book number 1, a LitRPG novel written by Lavelle Jackson. I actually already reviewed this novel earlier when it first came out. Liked it. It was an improvement over some of the author's other readings. Has some story issues, again. Not a perfect story. The author is generally kind of finding his writing style. So this is Ian's review of it. He says, campy with extra gore. Definitely true. He says, fun and amusing. Light. Thag smash real hard. Impress orc babes. I can't say it was sophisticated. It was brutal and in a viscerally satisfying way. I felt a bit askew when the guy who fell at suicide turns into a very confident bruiser. Once past that, well, it's a fantasy. Go for it, big guy. There were stats and things. Sorry. I enjoyed it. 7.7 out of 10. So he gives it a better review score. You can tell you I liked it a little bit more than perhaps the last one we talked about. But Tusk and Blade, again, it's very much it's a fan story, and you can definitely tell that in some of the writing styles when I remember reviewing it. But again, it's improved writing, and it's definitely a little more coherent, and it kind of resolves some of the issues I had with some of the author's other writings before. And so I gave it a positive score. I did like it. I liked it more than I did at 7.7 out of 10. So there you go. Next. We have Spells for Sale, Magic Volume number 1, Magic Online book number 1, written by Maxim Duran. It's very tiny lettering on that cover art. This is Ian's review. He says, big story. Dragons conquer the earth. Our standard of living is better. We just are a defeated species, given magical abilities by the administrator of a series of adventures follow. Will the hero protect his friends and family, or will they be killed or shipped off to jail? Some challenging tests and choices await a great read. He gives it a score of 8.1 out of 10. There you go. I haven't read the story. I looked at it. It didn't seem like LitRPG to me from the novel description. I don't know that it is. It could be more game-lit, but I liked it. So there you go. Next, The Destroying Plague, Disgardium book number 3, LitRPG series, written by Dan Striglanoff. He's also the author who wrote the RPG Level Up. It is, here we go. His review says, power gaming. Wow, that was awesome. I found it very exciting, levels grinding, and totally unfair perks. Wonderful. It starts off with some great sneaking around and ends with becoming the target of a holy war. Title of the next book. A great adventure that kept me up late reading. I'm glad the next one comes out soon. Score of 8.7 out of 10. So this is his best review score so far. I definitely can agree with that. I don't think I had quite as great of a time as I did. I gave it a high 7s. I think it was like 7.8, 7.7 or something. But this has always been a fun series. It's very little slice of life, but it also is an OP main character. The role from book 1 and book 3 are definitely more villainish. Book number 2 is a little not quite as much, but with definitely 1 and 3 definitely have him in a villain kind of role where he's the kind of a bad guy of the story world. And I like those aspects of it personally, so I give it a good review score. I've had a good time with everything Dan's written. And that's it. Those are all the review scores. Thank you for hanging out for Ian's Picks of the Week. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for hanging out with us. I think that's it for the podcast. Remember, you can visit us, hang out with us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, our website at LitRPGpodcast.com. If you want to check us out on Patreon, look for the Geek Bites podcast. That's just the title of the first podcast I wrote or did, and so that's what I said of the Patreon as. So it's there, but you are actually sponsoring all the podcasts we do when you support us on Patreon. That's 3 podcasts. So there you go. Remember, there are also lots of links in the show notes for some other LitRPG Facebook groups where you can hang out with authors and readers, and they talk and we chat and we throw memes up and we have a generally good time. And you get all of the nice daily deals or weekly specials from authors who are promoting their stuff. So there's some reasons for you to go and visit them. But of course, if you enjoy the podcast and want to support us in any way, shape, or form, you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. Help keep the podcast free, ad-free. Those are always good things. But until we can end again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.